Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartlidge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. Hi, and thanks for tuning in to our latest episode. We're doing something different for this one, which is our 132nd episode, and that is we're going to give you an opportunity to tap into the exclusive Animal Training Academy membership community. We are doing this with a brand new podcast show. It's called the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, and is hosted by previous ATA podcast guest and somebody who I feel is the operationalized definition of making ripples, Shelly Wood. Making Ripples is all about individuals who, through their life's work, motivate and inspire positive change in others. This can be through intentionally disseminating information, or it can just be in the way one conducts themselves and how they engage with the world and the earthlings around them. As one ATA member, J.R. Henderson, put it, it's like tossing a pebble into a pond and watching the ripples spread out. Our ATA membership has been active now for close to 4 years, and the individuals within are in their own corners of the world making and spreading ripples that we believe deserve to extend across the oceans. These ripples are making such huge waves and spreading positive reinforcement that the world better be ready, and hence why we had to create this show. And it's actually already launched a couple of days ago with 3 episodes already available. One with myself, the second with the amazing Joe Locke from Knows No Limits, and the third with the one and only Kiki Yablon. You can find all of these episodes in your favourite podcast app. So after you listen today, go find it and subscribe so that you can be part of this experience. And to celebrate, I thought we would share episode 1 right here with you today, where Shelly and I caught up and do what we do best, geeked out. Enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, the show where we share the stories of the ripple-making extraordinaires with behavior nerd superpowers who make up the Animal Training Academy membership. I'm your host and one of the happiness engineers at Animal Training Academy, Shelly Wood from Drop Your Jaws Dog Training in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the United States. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. This show is brought to you on behalf of the Animal Training Academy membership. So if you like the conversations in these episodes, then we want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people in the ATA membership, which you can find out more about at www.atamember.com. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalog of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help you problem solve your training challenges. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forums area. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. We will get started today where we will be talking with one Ryan Cartlidge. I cannot imagine anyone better to have with us today than Ryan. Ryan Cartlidge is a certified professional dog trainer through the Karen Pryor Academy and the founder of Animal Training Academy. He has been working internationally as a professional trainer since 2007, including in New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the US. Ryan has trained teams, developed animal training programs, been published in leading industry magazines, spoken at international conferences, and delivered presentations in a university on animal behavior. And now, through the Animal Training Academy, he connects hundreds of animal behavior and training enthusiasts with a large and growing library of lessons and tutorials delivered by renowned animal experts. So without further ado, it is my very great pleasure to welcome one Ryan Cartlidge to the show today, who is patiently waiting by. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us today.
Hey, my absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for taking the time to create the first episode of this new exciting show where we get to showcase the awesomeness of the Animal Training Academy membership and its members.
Well, I'm super excited about it and super excited to have you here with us today. So for now, let's just go ahead and dive straight into the first question today, Ryan. We are, of course, here to talk about animal training, but we in the animal training world have lives outside of animal training too. Many of us come from different educational and work backgrounds, and we have various professional and personal lives outside of animal training. I think it's interesting how sometimes one aspect of our life can have a huge influence on another aspect of our life. So to get us started off today, could you share a little bit about how your life outside of training has influenced or influences your training work and vice versa?
Yeah, I'm glad you said vice versa on there because I was going to say that it works both ways. And I think even more significant is the impact, potentially even more significant, I should say, is the impact that my experience in continually expanding knowledge about animal training and behavior has on my life outside of animal training and behavior. A significant area where that's, I'm sure, going to be highly valuable for me and interesting. And I've jumped in the deep end of the swimming pool and am frantically thrashing about at the moment is fatherhood, as we have our beautiful summer 4-month-old daughter recently joined us 4 months ago. And obviously, I mean, so yesterday she rolled, no, 2 days ago, she rolled from her back to her belly. And then after that, all she wants to do is roll from her back to her belly. It's so interesting to think about the reinforcing value of that for Summer. My mind explores the possibilities is it because this is something that Summer can control? As a 4-month-old, I don't know. Lying down on her back, she suddenly knows that she can control her environment now by rolling onto her tummy. And then even when she gets on her tummy, you can see all of her little micro movements with her arms, with her legs, and how she's kind of learning what happens every time she does that. I don't think consciously she's going, I wonder what happens if I move this leg. But there's reinforcement history there. And just watching that development is just so reinforcing as a father, interesting as a behavior nerd. And I've just got, a lifetime ahead of me of exploring with Summer, this person learning about the world. So that's really exciting. And I'm excited that I have chosen the career and the investment of time I have over my life so far, because I think it's really leveraged. I can really leverage it as a father now. And then just going about my daily business, watching human behavior as a teacher of the human learner when it comes to animal training and behavior, and thinking about. So yesterday we recorded a podcast where we talked about how sometimes you learn things in one context. So for example, you might be teaching a class and you teach targeting behavior to your students, and then your students don't just generalize using targeting to other aspects of their lives. Training classes where we do targeting. but we don't use it when we're at the car and we need to load the dog into the car, but it would be really helpful right now. We need to generalize those behaviors for human learners as well. And human learners need to take approximations, and we need to take things in baby steps, and we need to teach each human learner, in my personal opinion, we need to teach each human learner as a study of one, and we need to come up with shaping plans based on where they're at and what their reinforcers are. And that area just fascinates me, and I love to work with humans and use the knowledge that we have for all earthlings with our human learners. So that's the opposite way, what I know from my career as an animal trainer and how I use that in other areas of my life. I think to reverse that now, in thinking about this question, I remembered back to when I was about 13. We're on summer holiday with my family, and we used to read a lot. And my dad was reading a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I'd never read what one might label as a self-help book before. But due to being on a holiday and having lots of spare time and being 13, my dad said, "Hey, do you want to have a read of this?" Because my dad obviously thought that I needed to win some. No, just joking. And so anyway, I read that and it just blew my mind. And I kind of I started to go, oh, well, I wonder what happens if I apply this here. And all of that book really teaches you, in my personal opinion, gives you a greater set of tools, understanding of the value of, but greater tendency to place yourself in someone else's shoes and imagine what it must be like to experience the world or a situation from their perspective. That's what I feel the book gives you. So starting to do that, it really influenced me. And I didn't really then go out and start to purchase heaps of self-help books. I was 13, I didn't have the money to do that anyway. But later in life, I believe, when opportunities arose, I was probably influenced by that early learning experience of reading a book of that nature. So there are, and then I read a lot over my 20s and my teens, later in my teens. And I always felt like if I read a book and I take away one thing that I can use for the rest of my life, even if it's a tiny little thing, then that has huge value. So I was always open to reading anything really. But there's 3 books that I read that I wasn't reading in relation to animal training. So I say it's outside of my role as an animal trainer. I was just reading out of curiosity and just to self-improve, to better be able to place myself in other people's shoes and appreciate how other people must experience the world. So 3 books really stuck out to me that I've read that I now use heavily in Animal Training Academy and in my life and professional career as an animal trainer. One of those is How to Win Friends and Influence People. There's 4 books actually. I remember I met someone, I went to India for a friend's wedding, and my mate's uncle was there, and he was just this very charismatic and just he walked in the room and everyone kind of knew he was there, and you liked him. And I said to him, well, like what? Tell me a little bit about yourself. I can't remember how the conversation started, but anyway, at one point he said to me, "Have you read How to Win Friends and Influence People?" I went, "As a matter of fact, I have." And he said, "Do you read it every year?" And I went, no, I do not. But just this person had seemingly taken the offerings of that book and every year reminded himself of its teachings, and I was moved by that. It got me curious. Some of the other books have been Crucial Conversations. As a member of Animal Training Academy, Shelly, you know that it's something we talk about a lot there. Once again, that's really helping you, in my personal opinion, think about the other person's experience, and also acknowledge your own internal dialogue and fact versus story that you tell yourself, and it gives you a whole bunch of great tools. But I use that book, Crucial Conversations, heavily in my animal training career now to build upon my skill set at effectively communicating with other human learners. The other book, we recently did some podcasts about this, is The Growth Mindset. Really learning. We work with learners as animal trainers. We're teaching our learners, whatever species they be, sometimes they're humans. And I think there's, for me anyway, been huge value in learning. And I learned about the growth mindset from learning about marketing, not about animal training, about marketing. And it teaches you how to be a learner and teaches you how to understand other learners as well, and how to receive feedback. So that's one huge area from outside of animal training that I've brought into Animal Training Academy recently, and really using to help myself become a better learner, but hopefully also the human learners that I work with. And the other thing is First Things First. So that's a book by Stephen Covey. ATA content on that will be coming sometime in the future. So Stephen R. Covey, he wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, was one of the most well-known books that he's written from my understanding. First thing first makes you appreciate, my phone might ring. I might be at my desk writing a blog post and my phone might ring. And it might be a friend who wants to ask me a question about something, or it might just be a plumber who wants to ask me a question about a job they're going to do at my house or something like that. Now, the fact that my phone's ringing in the moment suggests that it's urgent. And it suddenly makes you think that that thing is urgent, and that you have to give time to it. First things first reminds us that just because something's happening right there in front of you now, just because your phone beeped and you got a new message, doesn't mean that that's more important than being a good father, being a good husband, being a good friend, being a good son, being a good Ryan Cartlidge, not the animal trainer, self-care. And so how this relates to animal training is in 2019, I burnt out. I didn't even know it. It took a conversation with a fellow animal trainer friend who also burnt out for me to realize that I was past burnt out. And at that point, someone asked me what my hobbies were outside of Animal Training Academy, and I couldn't answer because my life was animal training. And I see a lot of people use the word overwhelm when they are describing their experiences with their own animals or with working with clients. Burnout is real. Compassion fatigue. The vet industry in Australia has the second highest rate of suicide, from my understanding, out of any industry in the country. Mental health aspects of what we do are real, and they have life or death influences frequently. So remembering that all of these things we think are important and urgent aren't necessarily important and urgent. Being a good father, being a good husband. And so every week I send my wife a list of goals. She likes it because one of them's a goal that is going to help me become a better husband. About what I'm going to do to become a better husband, what I'm going to do to become a better father, what I'm going to do to have self-care for me. And how that influences my animal training life is it enables me to be a more efficient person at doing what I do, because I'm looking after myself and I'm looking after the other areas of my life. I'm putting the first things first, as Stephen Covey would have it. And I think this has tremendous value for our Animal Training Academy, our animal training community. And via Animal Training Academy, I hope to create some content about that. Anyway, I could go on and on, but hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah, Ryan, I think that definitely answers the question. And as you know, we have a few questions here that we already had prepared that we were going to talk about today. But I think that I could also go on and on with you discussing all of the things that you just talked about on this first question. I wondered if we would hear a little bit about Summer today. So I love that you mentioned her right away. And it makes me curious, about what those, just what you said, what those reinforcers for her for that rolling over might be, they're most likely, I'm going to guess, coming from the larger environment, so I wonder if you and your wife also play a little bit of a role in the reinforcer for some of that rolling over behavior. What do you think about that?
Well, the first day she did it, wifey messaged me and I was downstairs in my office and she was upstairs in our living room. And so I went upstairs and we put Summer on her back and I was standing off to one side going, come on, Summer, you can do it. Come on, roll over. And someone's like looking at me, smiling, going, oh. I imagine going, yay, Dad's here. And he's giving me so much entertainment. He's looking at me. He's making those weird sounds that he makes. This is great. Yay. And she didn't roll over. And I went, and then after a while, I was like, okay, well, if I have to get back to work now, I don't know if we can just get her to roll over whenever we want. So I'm sure I'm going to catch her. I'll see it later in the day. So I went to the bedroom to get something, and I hear my wife calling, quickly, she's doing it. And I come back in and she's rolled over onto her tummy. So immediately I start to learn about the antecedents and question about, is it attention that's reinforcing? Should I be boring and then wait till she's flipped over and then offer heaps of attention? So just those observations and drawing from those what we will, whether we're correct or not, we can test them out with little things like I've just said. It's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for sharing a little bit about that with us. And I really liked some of your other insights too, as far as those overlaps between animal training and the rest of our lives. We try to sometimes put things into these little boxes, but it's not really like that. There are influences from the rest of our lives coming into our training, and then outside of our lives, going the other way too. And I think you provided some really, really nice examples that I'm sure a lot of folks can relate to, especially that human example that you gave as far as the targeting behavior. We can teach somebody how to teach the animal they live with a target, but do they also then know when and how to use that target? So I thought that was a really nice example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still notice it in myself. Change the antecedents. So yesterday we've had Summer's granny from the UK, my wife's mum, staying with us for the whole of Summer's life thus far. She was meant to be here for 2 months. She would have been here nearly 6 months by the time she leaves next month because of the global pandemic. So it's been really helpful, but she went away for 4 days. On day one, we're like, oh, this is, it's nice to have our house back. On day 4, we're like, oh my God, Granny, get out. Because Summer didn't sleep the whole night, and I had a whole bunch of things scheduled for ATA, and wifey did the night shift, so she hadn't slept. So I babysat and worked yesterday. And I could see that there's a different set of antecedents. I'd never experienced that set of antecedents before. And I made some mistakes, and I've caught myself going, I know that, I've learned that. But then I went, hang on, I haven't learned that under this set of antecedents before. And I didn't generalize. I did something that I'd already learned. I should do a different way. But under this new set of antecedents, I reverted back. So I even notice it in myself on a daily basis. But I'm not going to make that mistake again. I'm going to listen to my inner voice next time.
Oh, great. Well, yes, thank you for sharing that. And I do have just one more. There was so much that you said in the very beginning that I would love to talk more about. I know we want to get moving to the next question, but before we do, I do have just one more thing to say, and
Mm,
that's about one of the books that you recommended,
mm,
and I had never heard of it before.
mm.
And hopefully we can, we'll note all of these books in the show notes that you mentioned as well, because I'm sure people will want to check those out if they haven't already. But that First Things First book, I definitely can really relate to some of the things that you were saying there, as far as, if a text message comes through, if the phone rings. I think that the world we live in today, we have so much stimuli just kind of flying at us all the time. It can become really easy to forget what to prioritize. So it was really cool hearing about that book, and also hearing about you kind of working through some of that and figuring out how, what are the important things that you want to focus on, and how can you set the antecedents to make that happen so that you are focusing on those things. So thank you for sharing about that book and talking a little about that with us as well.
Absolutely.
So I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. So let's go ahead and just dive in then again to the next question here. That's always fun to hear about those things. I'm putting little air quotes up right now for outside of animal training, because again, I think that sometimes those lines we draw maybe aren't so hard and fast like we think. But moving forward today, I was hoping that you might share with us, and I know that you have some good ones, but I was hoping you might share with us a recent training related challenge you have experienced, how you worked through that challenge, and some things that you learned by working through that challenge.
Yeah, and I was going to use a different example, but then I reread your questions this morning and saw the word recent. Uh, so some of you might have seen on social media, Animal Training Academy members would have seen in our community areas and our membership that I have been teaching Fibi to flop. We call it the Fibi flop on her side. And I wrote a blog about this, but it's one I thought I'd talk about today, because part of your question was what I've learned, and let me rephrase that to make it make sense with regards to what I'm going to say following this is what I'm learning, because I definitely don't think I'm at the end of the journey that I'm currently on. Going back to talking about first things first and feeling overwhelmed, there are some observations. I don't have hard data on this, so take this as Ryan's opinion based on his observations. Ryan's interpretation of what he observes. I observe people saying they're overwhelmed frequently, and I observe that, and in the Animal Training Academy membership, members are awesome at this, and there is a general repeated behaviour by numerous members of how feedback is given, and also how they present information about a training video they might share. We're very good at celebrating the approximations and pointing out, as we do with our animals, the things that we liked rather than the things that we don't like. One area of huge curiosity for me is how people think about and what value it does or does not have with regards to what their next approximation is. Now, my observations that I was talking about are that sometimes I've questioned somebody as to what their next approximation might be, and the answer comes across as the end behavior that person wants trained, and a significant amount of approximations between where they are and that end answer. And I'm just so curious right now, if I'm correct that my interpretation of what I observe, a lot of people feel overwhelmed. And when we've got a learner in front of us, often, for example, our dogs at home, our pet parrots, or our animals in zoos, and we've got all of these behaviors we want to train, and we have a session, we have an individual training session with our animal, and then our focus is on that end goal and we're not there yet. But if we're thinking about what just happened and what this learner requires next to move towards to move the needle closer to where we want to get to. And our focus is there. I'm curious as to how that changes how we feel about things. And so I've been doing an experiment with myself to see how I feel in hope that I can become a better teacher of others. And what that looks like is having a training session with a learner, and like I just described. And this is something I borrowed from Sarah Owings, and Sarah Owings calls it her training rubric. And she teaches, and I learned about this through practical application in Sarah Owings and Helix Fairweather's Cyber Scent course, where they have an online forums and they give you feedback. And they encourage users of that forum to present a training video and share 3 things they did that they liked, 3 things the learner did that they liked, and 1 small approximation that they want to change for next time. I modified that a little bit, same principles, just I try to decrease the amount of thinking I have to do. And I just focus on 1 thing that I did that I liked, 1 thing my learner did that I liked. And often in my experience, once again, Ryan's interpretations of what he observes, that doesn't always happen with some people. Often I've watched trainers train and you can see that point where something doesn't go right and their shoulders fall down and their head kind of goes, and then they're not paying attention to their learner in that moment, and this training session cannot be as effective as it might be. And so really training yourself to focus on those good things. And then 2 important words that I'm experimenting with, and my curiosity has me experimenting with from that 3rd element, is 1 small approximation for next time. Now, let me define approximation. Approximation can be we make an antecedent change, we change part of our loop, our reinforcement strategy, where our food's been delivered, where we keep our food, or we start to reinforce the next criteria, whatever it is. But approximation can also be we do any of those things and it doesn't move our learners' behaviour closer, and we learn something so that we can make smarter decisions next time. So that's how I define approximation. So what is 1 small thing, 1 and small thing that we can change for our next session? And I've been really diligent in just changing 1 small thing, even though sometimes I'm like, I want to change all of the things. Like just making 1 small change. And then because we've made that change in our next session, we can celebrate that. If an approximation is also defined by learning what doesn't work so that we can make better decisions, then there's always something to celebrate. So an example recently where I got to really put this to the test was we had trained Fibi to flop onto her side. What that looks like is from a sitting or a standing position, she would flop onto one side. So she'll be lying on her side with her head on the ground and her feet sprawled out in front of me. It was going great. We've been doing it for about a week or 2 weeks. And then one day, and Fibi does this sometimes, and I don't know the important elements of the environment that contribute to this. I haven't figured it out yet. But she just went, nah, not doing it anymore. Like, I don't even want to be close to you while you're asking me to do this. So it took me about a week to figure out. But all I did was I changed 1 thing, and I did a session. I did the following session, and I observed her behaviour, and I never repeated those things if they didn't work. I tried to modify them in some way, but it was small and it was gradual, and then there are other tools that I included in there, like flow charting. I immediately went, okay, cool. Something happened in that session, and I paused because I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So I'm going to write a flow chart out for this, and that would be my approximation. And then the next session, even though we didn't move closer, there were no unbroken loops. Everything, I knew exactly what I was going to do at every point in the session, and then that allowed me to collect good data to make better decisions next time. And then I lay down one session. I started to experiment with being in different positions. So rather than be on my knees, I was on a seat. Then I was standing, and then I tried lying down. So I was perched up on one arm, and my legs spread out in front of me, and I called Fibi over, and she flopped repetitively. and it took me a week to get there. But we got there, and then for whatever reason, if I was lying down, Fibi was 100% fine with it. And I just started approximating myself back up to a sitting position, and then a few days later, I was sitting again, and the flop was going perfectly. And in between that, I was, we went from kibble, standard biscuit type kibble, to some seaweed peak, to some chicken, to some wet dog food. Wasn't interested in any of that. She wanted me to lie down. And I can't tell you why. And someone said to me, aren't you going to figure that out first? And I went, well, maybe, but I'm not going to focus on that. I'm just going to celebrate that we got flops here, and think about what my next approximation is. So that's my example. That's what I've been learning. That's what I'm still learning. And here's the thing. What I can tell you is I've been doing it for months now, so there is reinforcement in there for me.
That is a great example, Ryan. And I did wonder if we would hear about the Fibi flop today. I'm going to guess that a lot of people listening to this episode are already members of Animal Training Academy. But if people aren't members, is there anywhere that they can go to see the Fibi flop? It's such an amazing... Go ahead, sorry.
No, that's all right. I actually wrote a blog post about problem solving the exact situation that I told you about. So on the ATA website, in the menu options at the top, if you're on a PC or if you're on a phone, you click the three little lines and it opens the menus. There's a blog section and you can jump in there. And I think the blog post is called Watch Me Train Fibi to Flop or something. And then there's also one working on the same behaviour, but working up to a 20-second duration of her maintaining the flop behaviour. So there's a few blog posts that have come out of that training project that you can find on the ATA website. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Okay, awesome. And I probably shouldn't admit this, but I get a little bit behind on the blog post sometimes. But I am totally inspired after listening to you share about this today to go check out the blog post on the Fibi flop. Having seen the finished product and a little bit along the way, it's really cool to hear about some of the challenges that you went through that I wasn't aware of, and how you worked through those and really wound up with a beautiful behavior from her. So I will check it out.
But I tell you what, on the Fibi flop journey, we've got to that point where, from the best of my knowledge, things are going well, and then she's like, "Nah," 3 times. And my observation skills haven't picked up on being able to predict that.
Yeah.
The last time I think is because we're starting to work on a Dremel to her nails, and then I probably didn't observe those micro little whispers from her enough. And so we switched tactics a little bit with her nail work, as you've been seeing in ATA as well. But we'll get back to the flop and we'll work through it again, and make sure that we listen to her as best as my skills and practical experience will allow me to. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be future blog posts for sure.
All right. Well, exciting stuff. And I am sure that everybody, or certainly most everybody listening, can relate to having a behavior coming along very nicely and then just disappearing.
Wait, what? It's not just me.
Yeah, so wonderful example. Thank you for sharing that. And I love to hear you also talk about, how you've observed that sometimes a lot of people are saying that they're overwhelmed, and then talking about asking people to narrow down what is your next approximation in this behavior. And a lot of times our next approximation in our mind might be that end goal, when really, if we would slice it down and focus on something really small, some of the things that you talked about, just changing the antecedent arrangement a little bit, or maybe just tweaking the reinforcement delivery a little bit, and making smaller goals. So our next approximation is just a smaller goal rather than always focusing on that. I've got to get the final flop done right now.
Yeah.
Can sometimes get us there.
And sometimes there are pressures. Sometimes there are real pressures that mean that you have to. And I don't want to discount those real life pressures. Like our animal has a veterinary visit on this date. I don't have that deadline at the moment. And also to remember after each of those sessions to celebrate the fact that you've tried that thing and you've got data now.
Yep. Very good. Very good. Great example. And love hearing about some of the stuff that you learned there. So it was a lot of fun to learn about. Thank you for sharing that with us. That brings us to our final question today. I was hoping that you could share a story about a behavior that you have trained or a training situation that you are proud of. And I'm sure you have a few of these too. So please share with us.
Yeah, the ones that came to mind and just seemed appropriate and the most poignant in my career were some of the very first training situations. I mean, yeah, there's many in it, and just as I say that, more comes to my mind. But there was, once I learned about positive reinforcement combined with Dr. Susan Freeman's teaching from her LLA course, like I've never looked back. Like that was a life-changing moment for me to get that information. And I was fortunate at the time that I had some very challenging situations that I could practically apply what I was learning. And situations that I got what one might label as success with. And a lot of reinforcement from, because I'm still doing it in 2020. So there's two stories. One is Security the Goose, and for those who follow ATA, you might have heard me talk about security in other contexts. And the other one is what's a bird that's previously been called Bob the wedge-tailed eagle, but his real name's Reg. The zoo that Reg used to be housed at is no longer. It got brought out and turned into a housing development. But Reg's career as an education animal, inspiring thousands of visitors every year to the facility where he currently resides, continues. You can see Reg at Taronga Zoo in Sydney now. In my personal opinion, under the care of one of the best training teams in Australasia. So I'm thrilled that Reg is soaring around Sydney Harbour, educating visitors to Taronga Zoo and inspiring them. When I got to the zoo where Reg was housed at the time, I could work with this animal in a show context. So what I mean by that is he would come out into a certain area of the zoo and he would do a certain number of behaviours for positive reinforcement in front of an audience of people. Whilst we talked about conservation, we used that opportunity where people were attentive and their minds were open to talk about important issues regarding conservation. And I could do that, but if I went into Reg's enclosure, he would fly at my face with his talons out. He did not want me in that space. Now, the tools at the time that I was presented with were a little bit more take choice away from Reg and didn't involve positive reinforcement in so much as we were intentionally focusing on observable behaviour that we were attempting to increase in frequency by adding reinforcement after those behaviours occurred. I didn't even really know what that meant at the time. In fact, I've got a training video from then and I explain what I'm doing and I'm like, I think Hannah Brannigan said in the podcast episode I listened to, like, if you're not embarrassed by those early training videos, then you're not improving. Sorry, I butchered your quote there, Hannah. Something along those lines, paraphrased by Ryan. So yeah, I didn't know what I was talking about then, but I kind of understood logically how these concepts worked, even though I hadn't gained experience practically applying them at that stage. I also went to Sydney. I went to Taronga Zoo at the time. I visited the bird show where Reg now lives. I met a dear friend of mine and someone I didn't know at the time and a mentor of the past decade, Nicholas James Bishop, who took me under his wing and used to call me up when, no pun intended, he took me under his wing and he used to call me up once a month or so and say, hey, how's things going with Reg? And I would say the challenges I was having and he would take them back to his team and then he would come back to me with a whole bunch of ideas. But we taught Reg to first, by just every time I walked past his enclosure, I would throw literally a mouse leg into his enclosure. And so the aim was that he would learn that I was the provider of predictable and pleasant events, to the point that I could start opening the door and throwing the mouse leg in and standing there for a little bit of time with him stationed on his perch, so I could put my foot in, so I could take a step in. This is scary. I mean, there was a wedge that I had a rake with me for protection in case things went pear-shaped. And up all the way up until the point I could stand in front of him. And then we started approximating my glove coming up. So when you're working with these birds, you wear big leather gloves as they jump onto your arm. And he would lean over, and then I started to experience what shaping was about. I started to shape his tail. So I wanted him sitting up, and I noticed that I could see through his legs where his tail was, and I could measure that based on the grain of wood on the back of his enclosure. So I started to only reinforce occurrences of when his tail was at a certain height. And I shaped him to sit upright whilst I came in with mouse legs. And then we worked on him stepping onto the glove calmly, and then we worked with him. He used to not like going down this hill we had where we had our pair of scales set up. So we set up a weigh station for him in his holding area, so he didn't have to leave his exhibit for that routine to be weighed. He used to not like some of the other birds of prey walking past his enclosure on our gloves, so we set up a big screen that we could roll up and down. And I've got a video of Reg now on his perch, and we could walk up to him, and just like you might with your parrot or your dog or your cat, we would put our hands under his wings and give him this massive scratch, and he would curl his talons up and lean into us, like to the point that if you walked away, he would fall off the perch. And I just had the most amazing relationship with this bird. And he provided so many opportunities to learn. And it was great to kind of appreciate that the staff at the time were observing what was happening, and came on that journey as well. That was really exciting. And I started getting more support to do some of the ideas we talked about. The second one, Security the goose, was a bird that was allowed to wander the park for free. Allowed to wander the park freely. So he didn't have a set area in the park where he lived. He just lived at the park. Unfortunately, though, there were some behaviours that Security exhibited that weren't too desirable, biting at visitors' boots, flying at them. The story goes he knocked over a baby pram one day with a baby inside. Luckily, no one was hurt, but it was decided that Security, with his current behavioural repertoire, was potentially not a good fit to have as just an animal that free roamed around the park. So he got moved up into the area I was working in, which was called the Bird Show, and put in this exhibit area with a brolga, which is a bird that stands nearly as tall as myself. So it's a crane species from Australia that was a young bird being trained up for this show. And in this new context, Security continued to fly at us and stab at our boots when we went into that space. So there's a clear antecedent there. Security wasn't just flying at our heads and stabbing at imaginary boots when there weren't people there. Now, that also made training that brolga crane really hard, like impossible, because you couldn't go in there and train it because Security would be at your feet or flying at you. And so I remember being in meetings where euthanasia was discussed for this animal. And now I know all of us who work with dogs or parrots or any animals know that animals get euthanized because of sometimes easily solved behavioral challenges. And it really didn't sit right with me, especially when I was learning from Susan Friedman. I had Nick Bishop to lean on and ask questions, and I could see very clear antecedents for these behaviours to occur, and I could understand from working with Reg how we shape new behaviour. And so I also had some very painful what are those teeth in the back of your mouth called that come through later in life? I can't remember. But anyway, they were causing me grief, so I had to go to the dentist. And I remember sitting in the dentist with Susan's functional assessment and intervention design form printed off from a computer and going through all of those questions, doing a functional analysis for security's behaviour, identifying that station training security was incompatible with flying at our head and stabbing at our boots. I'll probably do things differently nowadays, but at the time, this was pretty revolutionary for me. And then also creating a new area where we could move security whilst we train Ruben was an idea I came up with. And so I took this back to the team and they said, yep, go ahead and give it a go. We observed security eat. We saw he picked corn out at the start of every meal from his diet. It was a big mixture of different things presented in a bowl. So we removed all the corn. We used it to reinforce his behaviour and we station trained him in 3 days. So he would go and station instead of fly at us when we entered the enclosure. Then we modified the enclosure. We constructed out of what was already there. We just modified it to create an area where we could station train security when we went in, asked him to shift into this new area, shut the door, train Ruben, let him go. And it happened very quickly. And this was an animal that was going to be euthanized, potentially. Discussions were happening around that. And it's not the only time I've worked in a zoological facility or with domestic animals where that's been an option as well. And that is probably one of the most, like I said, poignant training situations of my entire career, and from one of the first animals I ever worked with in a professional context, using the skills that Animal Training Academy is built on now, was just, it just blew my mind how easy it was. And it's not always that easy, I was kind of definitely not always that easy. And it took work, and it took time to physically modify structures, build stations, observe what food items were favoured, put the shaping in, do the functional assessment. I mean, there was a potential investment of resources, but once we had the plan and we implemented it, it was simple. So that is those two stories and that time in my life. It will always be treasured by me, and has made me the person I am today. And I still lean on those lessons.
Those are really great examples, Ryan. Thank you for sharing those with us today. Again, just so much that I could keep talking to you about in the stuff that you said there. But we are, in the interest of time, probably gonna, we're nearing the very end here. One thing I want to point out about what you said, though, that I thought was really cool is in the ATA community, we talk about ripples a lot, about how, sometimes our actions influence other people, in the larger world. And I certainly heard you sharing about a lot of ripples in both of those stories, from Dr. Susan Friedman's ripples to you, Nicholas Bishop's ripples that you benefited from, and then the way that you were able to spread those, it sounds like, too, within the communities in which you were working. So really, really cool to hear about that. Also very, very wonderful. Very cool to hear about the major change with security, the goose as well, to be in those emotional places where, things like euthanasia are on the table, and to be able to make a difference. I know that definitely has to be a training challenge that you are proud of, for sure. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, and I think just want to make sure to put a shout out to all my mentors, and if that Susan Friedman and Nicholas Bishop have been some of the biggest that I've had in my career, but the list in 2020 is too long for this podcast episode. I definitely stand on the shoulders of giants with everything that I do, and I endeavour really hard in 2020 to never be the smartest person in the room, and acknowledge that everyone has something to teach you. Or ideas that you haven't thought of. So you're never going to find yourself in that position if you have that mindset anyway. I try the best to my ability to apply it. And also, one thing I've learned from that is behaviour. Well, to borrow from B.F. Skinner, the rat is never wrong. Behaviour is behaviour. In with security, the goose, and in another context, I've worked within zoological facilities where euthanasia has been on the cards. Sometimes the whole organisation has adopted labels for it. I mean, look at the name of security. They've adopted labels for these animals. And so to anyone else who shares similarities with that, I just want to take a hat off to placing yourselves in vulnerable positions and being an advocate and being a voice for our animals. It takes courage sometimes, and it definitely did then. And I know that I witness that every day with our ATA members as well. And it's an area of curiosity for me, is vulnerability and courage and brave learning. So they were definitely massive aspects of that those two stories as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you used that word courage and said that, it takes courage to be vulnerable and do these types of things. I know that when you were talking about security, you prefaced it before you started talking about the station training. You said something to the effect of you might do it different nowadays, and I think sometimes some of us, looking at myself here, can sometimes freeze, wanting to make sure we're training the perfect thing in a certain situation or doing things the perfect way. But sometimes I think the important thing is just having the courage to jump in and start making that first approximation like you did, using the information that you have and relying on the resources of the people that you have to help you as well, and jump in and do something. And it's life-changing for you maybe, but certainly for security it was. So great.
Yeah. And a recent example comes to mind, just as super quick. I just been training Fibi to back up and target her back feet on the station, and shared videos on social media, and really great community of people. This is on my private page. Really awesome conversation. Really, I loved it. Everyone was really respectful of each other, and I was very reinforced by it. Observations were the conversations that happened about the best way of teaching a backup behaviour. And one person asked me, they're an ATA member, love them. What was my reason for training the behaviour? And part of it's just because I want to have some contingency learning myself, and I want to learn myself about training back up in this way. And that just stuck out with me with what you just said then, that our goals can be, in my personal opinion, to not just about our learners, but also about our learning. And we can go online, we can read about numerous different ways of teaching backup. But just like you can learn not to touch a hot stove by reading not to touch a hot stove, actually touching a hot stove is a very different experience. So I think there's huge celebration to be had of the bravery shown to, I don't even know where I'm going with this. Just to not, just to place yourself in spaces of vulnerability and be okay with needing to learn.
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. And as you were talking, like 10 other things popped in my head that I was like, oh, I'm going to say this or ask him this. But talking to you has been incredibly reinforcing to me, because I know we had a certain timeline in mind for this episode, and it looks like we're getting close to doubling it. So maybe I'll have to table some of my so maybe I'll have to table some of my thoughts for another time to chat with you. about. Before we do officially wrap up, though, Ryan, could you share with everyone listening where they can go to find out more about you, where they can go to get in touch with you, find out about what you do, those types of things?
Yeah, you can come and celebrate Brave Learning with me on social media. You can just request a friend. I've still got a 1,000 or something friend requests left, I think, based on how much friends Facebook left you have. And then we've got a Facebook business page where if there's something that I want to sponsor, because Facebook business pages aren't great for actually spreading information organically, but you can follow that page, and you can go, and I'm on Instagram, Animal Training Academy, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. If you search for me, you'll find me. And our website is www.animaltrainingacademy.com, and soon to be a new membership website, which will be coming in the next couple of months, as well as other numerous projects and websites that will be launched soon. But for now, animaltrainingacademy.com, you can find all about our membership, our podcasts, plural, after this one gets added. And you can find our blog, and there's just so much information there. It's hurting my head to have to build the new website. In a good way.
I'm really excited about the new website after seeing a couple teasers here and there. It looks like it's going to be amazing.
HA on steroids is the new website. That's how I'm describing it.
I love it. I'm very excited for it. Well, we will, of course, link to all of this in the show notes, Ryan, so folks know. It sounds like they can pretty much just search for Ryan Cartlidge on social media, or look for Animal Training Academy on social media, or go to the website that you gave, but we will link to that in the show notes as well. This has been a lot of fun for me. Thank you so much, Ryan. On behalf of myself and everybody listening, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today and chat with us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And then talking about vulnerability and courage, there's none finer example than Shelly Wood, who, when I said, hey, do you want to be a presenter of my new podcast show on Animal Training Academy? She went, yep. And here she is. And if you've been looking at any of the timelines we've done for our ATA podcast over the last few years, Shelly's kindly donated her time to helping out with Animal Training Academy, and she's very active in our community. And I know that her why resonates with ATA's why very strongly in helping animals and their humans. So a massive thank you to you, Shelly, as well, for getting this podcast off the ground, giving it wings to go with earlier metaphors, and for everything that you do for animals and their humans.
Well, I'm very lucky to be able to do all of the things I do, including the things that you've given me the opportunity to do for Animal Training Academy. And thank you for all your help in holding my hand up until this point, and continuing to hold it for a little bit longer as I figure this podcast stuff out. But I appreciate all that, and definitely all of us appreciate you being here with us today. So thank you very much, Ryan. We do, of course, appreciate all of you tuning in as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and are interested in carrying on the conversation about working with the animals in our lives in the most positive, most fun, and most choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.atamember.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode, though. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.
Hey, before you go, I hope you enjoyed episode 1 of the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show. And we feel there is huge value in all of the amazing ripple makers we are going to be introducing you to over the coming while. This will be a monthly show, but as mentioned at the start, we've already launched with 3 episodes, all ready and waiting for you. You've just listened to the first one, And there is also an episode with the amazing Joe Locke from Knows No Limits and the one and only Kiki Yablon. They are all completely free with the hope of, you guessed it, making ripples. Just search for Animal Training Academy Making Ripples in your podcast app, and we'll see you there.